Hey everyone, and welcome back to Cosmic Currents. Today, we're talking about a sign whose reputation precedes it, Taurus, and we're going to unpack a truth that often gets overlooked in all the talk about grounding and security. We're going to dive into why the famous Taurian stability is often just a sophisticated mask for resistance to evolution. You know that feeling, don't you? That gut check moment when you know deep down that a change is required in your life. Maybe it's a relationship that's run its course, a job that's draining your soul, or a deeply ingrained habit that's holding you back from your potential. But the thought of moving, of changing the familiar landscape, creates an almost paralyzing anxiety. You build your life on solid ground, brick by predictable brick, and then the universe hands you a bulldozer, and your first, most visceral reaction is to dig your heels in even deeper. You find yourself saying, "This is secure, this is reliable, this is mine," even as your spirit whispers, "But is it growing?" This isn't about blaming the sign, it's about understanding the core mechanism. Taurus is the first of the earth signs fixed in its modality. It represents the time of year when the seeds have taken root, pushing deep into the soil. This energy is essential for manifest reality. It builds, it sustains, it makes things tangible. But when this energy becomes calcified, when the roots stop seeking new nutrients and simply hold the structure in place, the result is stagnation. The spiritual principle here is simple but profound. True stability is not static. It is the resilience to move with change. Think of a mighty oak tree. Its stability isn't that it never moves. It's that its roots are so deep, it can withstand the strongest gale. Yet its branches are fluid enough to sway and drop leaves for rebirth. The resistance, the grip that feels so comforting, is actually draining your energy, maintaining a status quo that is spiritually obsolete. You expend more effort holding onto the old fence than you would building a beautiful new meadow. The core, actionable insight we'll work with today is this. You must distinguish between foundational grounding and paralyzing fixation. Grounding means having a centered, present awareness that supports action. Fixation means using the known world as an excuse to avoid the necessary evolutionary leap into the unknown. When you default to comfort and repetition, you are actively choosing the spiritual equivalent of a holding pattern. You're waiting for the universe to force the change rather than collaborating with it. Consider this real-world scenario. You might have a savings account that is safe and predictable, earning a minuscule interest rate, mirroring the safety you crave in other areas of your life. It feels good to have that number, that tangible security. But every instinct for growth, every chance to invest in your own spiritual or creative development gets vetoed because it introduces an element of risk, an element of instability. The money isn't working for you. You are working for the feeling of safety the money provides. You are prioritizing the feeling of security over the potential for abundance. The universe is constantly expanding, and if you are anchored too heavily to a single point in space and time, that job, that relationship, that familiar sofa, you are resisting the expansion. And resistance, my friend, creates friction, tension, and eventually breakdown. The cosmic forces of growth, like Uranus, which we'll discuss soon, don't care about your comfort zone. They care about your soul's agenda. So, as we begin this deep dive, take a moment to look around your life. Where have you mistaken a familiar routine or a predictable outcome for true evolutionary stability? Where are you just waiting for the storm instead of learning to sail? Here's your first thought-provoking question for self-reflection. If your soul had no memory of past fear or loss, what single change would it ask you to make right now? Let that question settle. It cuts right through the protective layers of the fixed earth. Before we dive into the stars, if you're finding these insights helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps this energy reach more people who need it. Drop a comment below and tell me a question you're asking the universe right now. Alright, find a comfortable spot and let's align our energy with the cosmos. We're going to peel back the layers on this beautiful, yet sometimes overly stubborn energy. Continuing this deep exploration, we arrive at the core elemental and house placement that defines this particular brand of fixation. Earth's deepest grip. As an earth sign, Taurus is ruled by the senses and rooted in the material world. It is naturally and necessarily concerned with the tangible, the physical, and the reliable. Astrologically, Taurus governs the second house, which is traditionally the domain of self-worth, personal resources, possessions, and income. Notice the immediate connection. How you value yourself is deeply intertwined with what you possess and what you can tangibly hold on to. This is where the resistance to evolution finds its first and deepest anchor point. When the evolutionary pressure mounts, the Taurian energy instinctively turns to the second house for comfort and safety. You clutch your resources, be they money, a specific skill set, a comfortable home, or even a predictable body size, because these are the markers of your established reality. The spiritual crisis happens when you mistake these external markers for your actual intrinsic worth. When you define stability as the constant presence of X dollars in the bank or Y items in your possession, any suggestion of change feels like a threat to your very being. This generates a profound fear of spiritual loss. It's not just the fear of losing the house, it's the fear of losing the identity built around the house. It's not just the fear of losing the income, it's the fear of losing the safety net that allows you to feel inherently secure and valuable. The Earth's grip is so deep because it confuses the container with the consciousness. You believe that if the container breaks, the essence inside will dissipate, which is the exact opposite of spiritual truth. The soul grows by shedding containers. The actionable insight here is, you must consciously decouple your self-worth from your net worth. This is an ongoing practice of internalizing the truth that your value is infinite, non-negotiable, and completely independent of any external, finite resource. When you feel that tightening, resistant grip, that desire to say no to a new opportunity because it involves too much risk, ask yourself, what part of my identity do I fear losing if this possession or situation changes? Let's look at a real-world scenario. Imagine you have a large collection of objects, maybe books, vinyl records, or physical art that you've amassed over years. They represent your history, your taste, your dedication. The thought of decluttering, selling, or simply giving them away creates genuine physical anxiety. The Taurian energy sees this not as creating space, but as tearing down a museum of the self. The spiritual evolution asks you to realize that the wisdom is in your mind, the art is in your appreciation, and the music is in your soul. The material objects are just echoes. When you cling to the echoes, you miss the live performance of the present moment. This resistance is often cloaked in practicality. You'll hear the argument, I'm just being responsible, I'm being grounded. But we're talking about fixed earth energy, soil that has become compacted and can no longer absorb water, rather than fertile flowing earth. Responsibility is about managing the present moment well. Resistance is about controlling an unknowable future based on a painful past. So, the deep spiritual task of this energy is to transmute the second house attachment from possessions to process. How can you invest your time, energy, and money into experiences, growth, and learning things that can never be taken away other than relying on static goods? Can you recognize that the greatest resource you possess is your own ability to generate new ideas, new income, and new experiences, rather than relying on what you have already generated? Here is your second thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What is the one resource you clutch the tightest? And what spiritual truth are you avoiding by defining yourself through its safety? Allow this contemplation to loosen the Earth's grip, even just a little. Building on the concept of the Earth's deep grip, let's move into how this need for material grounding morphs into an emotional inertia, what we recalling the comfort trap of the familiar. Taurus, in its pursuit of stability, excels at creating routines, established patterns, and a highly predictable environment. This predictability is meant to minimize variables, ensuring that life unfolds with minimal surprises. And for a time, this serves a powerful purpose. It conserves energy and allows for deep focus on building. But as we're exploring, evolution requires friction, and the comfort trap is frictionless. When you settle too deeply into the familiar, your soul essentially goes on autopilot. You drive the same route, eat the same foods, spend time with the same few people discussing the same issues, and engage in the same self-talk. This consistency, which feels like security, is actually a spiritual soporific. It puts the evolutionary impulse to sleep. You create a life that perfectly matches your current comfort level. But in doing so, you build a self-imposed prison, however luxurious it might be. The walls of this prison are made of shoulds and always haves. I should always be in this job because it pays well. I always have to handle things this way because it's the way I've always done it. These rules, born from past success or fear, become the static framework of your present reality. You'll find the Taurian energy resisting invitations, new ideas, or different ways of being, not because they are genuinely bad, but simply because they necessitate a deviation from the established, safe script. The friction of learning a new system, meeting a new type of person, or even just trying a new flavor is enough to trigger the energetic resistance. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must invite strategic, low-stakes disruption into your life to recalibrate your nervous system for evolution. If you wait for the universe to send a tidal wave of change, and it will, as we discussed in Section 1 with the inevitable friction of resistance, the shock will be too great. You need to start practicing the art of choosing instability in small doses. Here is a real-world scenario. You might be in a long-term, comfortable relationship that has become deeply familiar. It provides a reliable structure for your life. However, you know the relationship has stopped evolving, and you're both relying on the memory of connection rather than creating a new connection today. The comfort is the trap. You fear the emotional upheaval, the temporary discomfort that honest communication or a necessary separation would bring. and so you prioritize the familiar over the fulfillment. The fixed earth energy would rather endure a familiar unhappiness than risk the raw, potent energy of a necessary, temporary breakdown. Your spiritual work is to recognize that the comfort you cling to is often just delayed discomfort. You are choosing the slow, steady ache of stagnation over the acute, temporary pain of growth. True. Evolving comfort comes from within a deep sense of self-trust that knows you can handle whatever the external world presents. Think back to the question we left you with about the resource you clutched the tightest. Now, consider how much of your daily routine is structured to protect that resource, or to avoid challenging the status quo that ensures its safety. When you begin to introduce novelty, a completely different walk, an unexpected book, a conversation with a stranger, you train your nervous system to associate change with stimulation rather than threat. This is the essential work of loosening the grip. Here is your thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What minor, low-stakes routine can you deliberately and consciously break today to remind your soul that change is not a threat, but a skill? Begin to gently dismantle the comfortable prison, starting with the doorknob. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, never lets stagnation persist indefinitely. If you refuse to move the energy yourself, the cosmos will send a force to do the job for you. This brings us to a major ongoing astrological phenomenon that is directly challenging the Taurian fixation: Uranus, the cosmic jolt. Uranus, the planet of radical change, disruption, innovation, and sudden awakening, has been transiting through Taurus for some time. This is not a subtle influence. It's a cosmic electrical current running through the fixed Earth. Uranus in Taurus is specifically designed to expose and dismantle everything that the Taurian energy holds sacred and static. Our relationship to money, our physical security, our inherited values, and the comfort of our routines. If the Taurian energy is a sturdy, well-built dam designed to contain a predictable body of water, Uranus is the sudden, unexpected earthquake that introduces cracks and demands a new flow system. You cannot maintain the comfortable, calcified status quo when the revolutionary planet is activating your deepest need for stability. The pressure you might be feeling right now, that sudden, inexplicable urge to quit the job, end the relationship, or completely restructure your financial portfolio, is often the Uranian energy urging you toward a breakthrough. It's an electrical surge that bypasses the logical, slow-moving Taurian mind and goes straight to the higher centers, screaming, "You are bigger than the box you built." The actionable insight here is, you must consciously cooperate with the unexpected, treating sudden shifts not as problems to be managed but as gifts to be utilized. When that unpredictable event occurs, the unexpected expense, the job restructure, the sudden attraction to a radically different life path, your fixed Earth default is to tighten, resist, and try to restore the old order. The evolutionary path is to lean into the chaos, asking, what new, more authentic structure is the universe trying to help me build? Consider the real-world example of an investment strategy. The fixed Earth energy is prone to burying its resources literally or metaphorically in safe, low-risk assets. Uranus comes along and throws a wrench into the system, perhaps exposing an old way of managing money as inefficient, or suddenly revealing a cutting-edge new technology or idea that requires a radical shift in perspective and investment. The resistance says no, too risky, stick to the familiar. The evolutionary response says, the universe is showing me the future is not based on the past. I must become flexible. Remember that last question we left you with, about breaking a small routine? That small practice is how you build your Uranian muscle. It trains you to accept change gracefully, so that when Uranus delivers a major, life-altering event, your internal system doesn't shut down entirely. This is about transforming the fear of the unknown into the thrill of radical self-reliance. True stability under this Uranian influence is knowing that you are agile enough to create your own security anywhere, anytime. If you are fighting against the changes happening in your life right now, you are effectively fighting the cosmos. You are generating immense spiritual drag. The fixed nature of Taurus means that the changes it eventually makes are incredibly stable. Once the Uranian lesson is integrated, you build a future-proof foundation, not one based on obsolete fear. This time is demanding you evolve your concept of security itself. It is asking you to anchor your stability not in second-house possessions, but in the 11th house of higher consciousness and collective innovation, which Uranus rules. Here is your fourth thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Where in your life are you currently saying, "This cannot change"? And what revolutionary future-forward insight is lurking right behind that resistance? Embrace the jolt. Let the electrical current wake you up. As we continue to dismantle the protective shell of stability, let us confront the energetic expression of this resistance that is most commonly associated with this sign, the my way or the highway stance. The classic stubbornness of Taurus isn't just a quirky character trait. It is a sophisticated, deeply entrenched defense mechanism rooted in the fear we discussed earlier, the fear of being destabilized or proven wrong, which the Taurian energy equates with a threat to its core self-worth. When you refuse to budge on an idea, a method, or a planned outcome, you are unconsciously declaring that the established reality is the only safe reality. To concede that another way might be better, or even possible, means admitting that your current foundation might be flawed or incomplete. For fixed Earth, this admission feels like a total structural failure. The sheer energetic cost of processing new information, admitting an error, or restructuring an internal belief system is perceived as greater than the cost of simply digging in your heels and defending the status quo. The actual goal of stubbornness isn't to win the argument, it is to maintain energetic coherence at all costs. You are attempting to keep your internal and external worlds perfectly aligned and predictable. If someone else's method or truth is allowed to penetrate, it creates a disruptive internal wobble, and the fixed energy instantly raises the barricades. The core, actionable insight here is, you must consciously reframe flexibility as a sign of superior strength, not weakness. True strength is not defined by how rigidly you can hold a position. It is defined by how quickly and intelligently you can adapt to a changing environment. The strong oak tree bends without breaking. The brittle, fixed structure snaps. Let's use a real-world example. You might be working on a collaborative project, a business venture, a renovation, or a family decision. You have a detailed, step-by-step plan. The Taurian energy loves a solid plan. When a partner suggests an alternative approach, one that might be more efficient, but which deviates significantly from your plan, the immediate, visceral reaction is resistance. You find yourself generating excuses, criticizing their lack of foresight, or even subtly undermining their idea. You are not protecting the project. You are protecting the safety of your original vision. The evolutionary challenge is to pause in that moment of resistance and ask, is my certainty serving my ultimate goal, or is it serving my need for control? When you find yourself in the my way or the highway mindset, you are sacrificing potential exponential growth for predictable linear progress. You are choosing the security of the known path over the potential of the unknown destination. This dynamic is not just external. It happens in your self-talk too. How often do you cling to a past narrative about yourself? I'm just not good with money. I've always been shy. I always fail at fitness. These are fixed Taurian statements that function like internal highways you refuse to exit. They feel safe because they are known, but they prevent you from evolving into the person you could be. You are essentially being stubborn against your own future self. Remember the Uranian jolt we discussed? Uranus is forcing you to reckon with the fact that the external world is changing, whether your internal certainty permits it or not. The more rigidly you insist on your way, the more forceful the cosmic intervention will have to be to create the necessary shift. Start practicing the radical act of saying, "Tell me more," when your instinct is to say, "No." Here is your fifth thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Where is your insistence on being right currently costing you connection, growth, or a more expansive outcome? Use the answer to consciously drop your internal shield. Now that we've explored the defense mechanism of stubbornness, let's shift our gaze to the core energy that drives this sign, its ruling planet. Venus Taurus is blessed with the sublime energy of Venus, which governs love, beauty, harmony, and pleasure. However, any powerful light casts an equally potent shadow. We need to examine the Venusian shadow, addiction to beauty and ease. When the Taurian energy is unevolved, the pursuit of comfort and aesthetic pleasure transforms into an avoidance mechanism. You seek sensory delight, beautiful surroundings, fine food, soft textiles, luxurious items, not just for genuine appreciation, but as a way to anesthetize yourself against the harsh, uncomfortable, or ugly truths of evolutionary life. This shadow manifests as an over-reliance on sensory indulgence and a resistance to anything difficult, challenging, or raw. The spiritual trap here is that you begin to confuse aesthetic ease with spiritual peace. Spiritual peace is an inner state of unshakable calm that exists regardless of external circumstances. Aesthetic ease is a temporary second-house condition reliant on having things just so. When the fixed earth demands a constant, harmonious, aesthetically pleasing environment, it becomes incapable of functioning effectively in the messy, imperfect, and sometimes painful process of growth. You prioritize the soft landing over the necessary leap. The core, actionable insight for transcending the Venusian shadow is, you must deliberately seek out and engage with the messy, unpolished truths of life as a spiritual practice. This means consciously embracing the discomfort of conflict, the challenge of creation, and the ugliness of destruction. Recognizing these as integral parts of the cosmic cycle that Venus actually represents. True Venusian harmony is achieved when all aspects, light and shadow, pleasure and pain, are integrated. Consider a real-world example in the realm of creativity. You might be a talented artist or writer, but you only work when the mood is perfect, the light is just right, and your studio is immaculate. The moment frustration hits, or the work becomes difficult, messy, or demands a radical shift in direction, you stop. You retreat to comfort, a gourmet meal. A beautiful distraction, because the second house desire for ease has hijacked the fifth house mandate for self-expression. The evolution requires you to realize that the most profound beauty often emerges from the struggle, the revisions, and the initial chaotic attempts. When you use beauty and ease as a shield, you are essentially telling the universe, I will only evolve if it feels good. But evolution rarely feels good in the moment. It feels like stretching, breaking down muscle tissue to rebuild it stronger. The Taurus-ruled body often carries this energetic resistance or reluctance to push past the comfortable point in physical exercise, or a stubborn adherence to comfort foods, even when they no longer nourish the spirit. Remember that Uranian disruption we talked about? When Uranus hits your Venusian realm, it might manifest as a sudden financial difficulty that forces you to simplify your aesthetic, or a relationship shakeup that dismantles a comfortable but stagnant codependent harmony. These events are not punishments. They are cosmic interventions designed to show you that your true resource or inner peace cannot be purchased or decorated. Here is your sixth thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What difficult, unpolished, or messy project are you currently avoiding because the process doesn't promise immediate ease or comfort? Allow yourself to enter the mess. That is where the real gold is hidden. Moving beyond the personal addiction to comfort, let's explore how this fixation translates into the material world, specifically concerning the second house realm of assets. We're talking about the tension between resource hoarding versus flow, the Taurian energy driven by the instinct for survival, and the fear of scarcity, which is often a past life or ancestral fear, has a strong tendency to accumulate and hold resources, money, time, energy, information out of a deep-seated belief that there won't be enough later. This translates into a pattern of hoarding. It's not necessarily about being greedy, but about being fearful. You clutch the resources tightly, refusing to circulate them, invest them, or share them, because the sheer presence of the asset is mistaken for the promise of safety. However, the spiritual truth of the universe is that abundance is not a static pile, it is a dynamic flow. A river that stops flowing becomes stagnant and eventually toxic. Similarly, energy, money, and time that are hoarded become inert and block the very abundance you are seeking to secure. The spiritual principle being violated here is the universal law of reciprocity. To receive, you must release. When you hold on too tightly, you are sending a signal to the universe that you don't trust its infinite capacity to provide. You are operating from a scarcity mindset, even if your bank account is full. This mindset, rooted in fear, is the true barrier to your evolutionary financial and energetic freedom. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must practice radical, conscious circulation of resources as an act of faith and trust. This means spending money on growth-oriented ventures, investing your time and energy into new unproven projects, and generously sharing your knowledge and skills, all before the results are guaranteed. You are trading the illusion of guaranteed safety for the reality of exponential flow. Consider a real-world scenario. You might be holding on to a significant amount of money in a very safe, low-yield account, paralyzed by the thought of investing it in something with a higher but variable return. Or perhaps you have a valuable skill or creative talent that you refuse to share or monetize because you fear that once you give it away, you'll be left empty, or that your unique edge will be lost. The fixed earth energy says, keep it safe, hold the line. The evolutionary wisdom says, put it into circulation. The universe is a perfect ecosystem. The resources you release will come back in new, more vibrant forms. Recall the concept from Section 4. Uranus demands a new, future-forward perspective on resources. Hoarding is an ancient, survival-based mechanism. Flow is the intelligent, modern, conscious mechanism of abundance. When you release resources, you create a spiritual vacuum that the universe is compelled to fill. You demonstrate to your subconscious that your security is not dependent on the current level of your assets, but on your inherent infinite ability to generate them. The great spiritual challenge here is to redefine security not as a wall built around your possessions, but as a trampoline that allows you to bounce back from any setback. The hoarded resources become heavy anchors. The circulating resources become sails that catch the wind of evolution. Here is your seventh thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What fear-based resource, money, time, or energy are you clutching today? And what radical act of generous release can you make to signal your trust in universal abundance? Let that release be a breath of fresh air for your soul. We've dissected the external traps, the reliance on comfort, the planetary pressure, and the hoarding instinct. Now, let us go deeper into the internal landscape that justifies all this resistance. the unexamined belief system. Fixed Earth energy is incredibly adept at maintaining its internal structures, and this includes deeply rooted beliefs about how the world works, how you deserve to be treated, and what is necessary for your security. These beliefs, often adopted in childhood or inherited ancestrally, function like the bedrock of your personal reality. The resistance to evolution in the Taurian energy is often not a resistance to action as much as it is a resistance to revising an internal operating manual. When a new truth arrives, a piece of evidence that contradicts a long-held belief about your financial capability, your attractiveness, or your ability to handle chaos, the immediate impulse is to reject the new data rather than restructure the foundation. Why? Because the established belief system, however limiting, feels safe because it is predictable. It's a known quantity. The spiritual principle here is that your evolution is limited only by the boundaries of your current thought patterns. If you believe deep down that money is hard to come by, every opportunity for flow, as we discussed in Section 7, will be unconsciously sabotaged. If you believe love requires sacrifice and suffering, you will reject relationships that offer easy, healthy connection. These beliefs are the quiet architects of your stagnation. They are the unseen chains that link your present behavior to past fears. The core, actionable insight is, you must commit to an honest, non-judgmental audit of your long-held beliefs, actively identifying and challenging those that generate fear or contraction. This is the work of spiritual archaeology, digging up the assumptions that were installed long ago and asking, does this belief still serve the expansion of my soul, or is it merely maintaining an obsolete sense of safety? Consider this real-world example. You might have a deeply ingrained family belief that successful people are arrogant and overworked. This belief feels fixed and true. When a high-profile, low-stress, and genuinely fulfilling career opportunity comes along, your Taurian energy, protecting the established belief system, will find 100 practical-sounding reasons to reject it. It's too far. The commute will be difficult. I don't know those people. The underlying resistance is not logistical, it's energetic. You are protecting your identity as someone who doesn't risk becoming arrogant and overworked, even if that identity is keeping you small. To break this pattern, you must become a conscious observer of your own thoughts. Every time you feel that heavy, resistant no to a new possibility, catch the thought that follows. That thought is the gatekeeper belief. When the thought is identified, you don't fight it, you simply question it. Is that absolutely true? Can I know that for sure? What evidence exists to the contrary? Remember, the goal is not to become ungrounded, but to ground yourself in truth, which is always dynamic and evolving, rather than an assumption, which is static and limiting. You are transitioning from being a rigid container of fixed ideas to a flexible vessel for universal wisdom. The greatest act of self-love for Fixed Earth energy is the willingness to admit, I was wrong about myself. Here is your 8th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Identify one major life decision you've been avoiding. What single, repetitive thought or rule about yourself or the world is the only thing standing between you and taking that leap? Shine a light on that belief and watch its power begin to fade. Having examined the internal belief systems that create resistance, let's now turn to the powerful primal symbol associated with this energy, the bull, we're going to discuss. Relating to the raging bull, the common image of Taurus is one of quiet, bovine serenity, grazing peacefully in a field. But when threatened, or when the fixed energy is pressurized, the bull emerges powerful, immovable, and sometimes destructive. This archetype is essential because the raging is often not external, it's an internal tension held back by resistance. The resistance to evolution creates immense psychic and physical pressure. The bull represents a vast, potent, physical energy, the kind of strength needed to build pyramids or move mountains. When this energy is not used for expansion and growth, it gets trapped, generating heat and volatility internally. This trapped, latent power is the raging bull within, which manifests not as a sudden outburst, but often as chronic tension, subtle irritability, or an inability to relax and release the constant low-level grip on life. You are expending energy holding back your own potential. The spiritual insight here is that resistance is merely misdirected power. The same energetic force you use to stubbornly say no to change is the power that could fuel a transformative yes to your highest destiny. The bull's power is meant for forward momentum, for creating substantial, tangible results. When it's used to anchor itself to a past reality, it becomes self-limiting and eventually self-defeating. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously channel the bull's potent energy into constructive evolutionary action, rather than letting it calcify as reactive defense. This means moving from a defensive posture to an offensive in the best, proactive sense posture in your life. Let's look at a real-world example. You might be fiercely protective of your personal time and space, a classic Taurian boundary defense. When a necessary work project or an exciting personal opportunity demands more time and energy, your internal bull resists, feeling threatened and overworked. You find yourself exhausted and resentful. The evolutionary shift is to redirect that massive protective energy not into defending the boundary against the external demand, but into fiercely protecting the quality of your effort. Instead of resisting the work, you channel the bull's focus into executing the work with singular, deep concentration, accomplishing more in less time, and then consciously using the remaining powerful energy for profound rest and self-care. The energy moves from blocking to focusing. Think back to the stubbornness we discussed in Section 5, that immovable nature is actually the bull's incredible capacity for endurance. When you direct that endurance toward a spiritual goal, meditating every day, finishing that creative project, committing to that healthy lifestyle becomes your greatest asset. But when it's pointed at resisting necessary change, it becomes a monumental liability. The inner rage is simply the soul's frustration with the lack of movement. It's the pressure cooker telling you the lid needs to come off. Your job is to gently turn that pressure into thrust. What are you waiting to release into constructive action? Where are you sitting on untapped power because it feels safer to be still? Here is your 9th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Where are you holding back massive constructive energy right now? A suppressed idea, a deferred project, an unsaid truth? And what small physical action can you take today to begin releasing that potent energy forward? Turn the inner rage into rocket fuel. After acknowledging the latent power of the bull, it is crucial to pivot and recognize the incredible gift this energy offers when it is evolved and consciously utilized. We now move to the gift of sensuality as a spiritual tool. Taurus, deep innate connection to the 5 senses. Taste, touch, sight, smell, and sound is often misapplied toward material indulgence, as we noted with the Venusian shadow. However, at its highest vibration, this connection is the fastest and most profound path to presence and spiritual grounding. The evolutionary truth is that the physical body is the sacred temple of the spirit, and the senses are the antennae that root you directly into the now. The resistance to evolution often comes from being too far out in the future, fear of loss, or too far in the past, attachment to safety. The Taurian gift is the ability to anchor consciousness squarely in the present moment via the physical body. The core actionable insight here is, you must transmute sensory desire from an escape mechanism into a practice of profound mindfulness. Instead of using a beautiful object, a rich meal, or a comforting environment to distract yourself from difficult change, you use the sensory experience to intensely focus your awareness, creating a state of grounded, present, and unshakable calm. This is sensory connection, not sensory dependence. Consider a real-world example. Instead of comfort eating to numb the anxiety of an impending professional shift, you engage in a slow, highly mindful practice of preparing and eating a simple meal. You focus intensely on the texture, the aroma, the specific flavors, and the warmth of the food. By turning the act of eating into a meditation, you use the sense of taste and smell not to indulge a craving, but to anchor your entire awareness in the physical act. In that moment of complete presence, the anxious thoughts about the future lose their grip. You prove to yourself that your stability resides not in the outcome, the stability of the job, but in the immediacy, the stability of the breath and the body. This is true grounding. It teaches your nervous system that it is safe to be present, even if the future is uncertain. The resistance breaks down when you realize you don't need the external environment to be fixed. You need your internal awareness to be fixed steady. You can apply this to any sense. Truly hearing music without analyzing it, fully feeling the ground beneath your feet when you walk, intensely seeing the color of the sky without naming it. Remember the bull's potent energy from the last section? When that power is channeled through the senses in this mindful way, it creates an unparalleled sense of internal solidity. You are not stubbornly resisting the outside world. You are so deeply present in your body that external chaos simply flows around you. This is the difference between static resistance and resilient presence. Here is your 10th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Choose one sensory experience you usually use for distraction. For example, coffee, a hot bath, music. How can you dedicate 5 full minutes to that experience, focusing 100% of your attention on the raw sensory input, transforming it from indulgence into a spiritual anchor? Let your body lead you back to the now. Building on the grounding power of the senses, we now tackle the ultimate spiritual trap of the second house, the deep human tendency toward possessiveness. Our focus shifts from external objects to an internal mindset, moving from ownership to stewardship. The Taurian energy, being the sign of personal possessions and resources, can easily confuse deep appreciation with a desire to control and claim. You start to believe you own your money, your ideas, your relationships, and even your future path. This sense of ownership is the cornerstone of resistance to evolution, because ownership inherently implies control and permanence. If you own something, you feel you have the right and the power to prevent it from changing or leaving. This mindset is fundamentally antithetical to the nature of reality, which is constant flux and flow. When a change is required, a person needs space, a resource must be released, or an old idea is rendered obsolete. The owner resists, feeling violated and destabilized. The spiritual truth is that nothing in the material world truly belongs to you. You are merely a temporary custodian of energy, resources, and connections. We are all stewards managing the gifts of the universe for a time before they are meant to move on, evolve, or return to the collective. True spiritual security comes from knowing you are an excellent manager of what you've been given, not a rigid hoarder of what you claim. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously reframe every resource, possession, and relationship in your life as a temporary assignment, asking how you can best serve its highest purpose while it is in your care. This radical shift in perspective instantly diffuses the emotional charge and anxiety attached to loss or change. Consider a real-world scenario involving a relationship. The fixed earth energy can confuse profound, stable love with emotional ownership. You might subconsciously believe you own your partner's time, emotional landscape, or presence in your life. When they express a need for change, a new personal goal, a geographical move, or a need for different emotional connection, the owner reacts with panic, withdrawal, or anger, viewing it as a betrayal of their security. The steward recognizes that this person is a unique, sovereign soul entrusted to their care for a shared journey. The steward asks, how can I support their highest evolution, even if it requires me to loosen my grip and change my life? This act of release is the highest expression of Venusian love, which is selfless. Remember how Uranus is shaking up the second house? That planet is demanding you drop the concept of fixed, permanent ownership, especially concerning finances and possessions. Are you managing your money to maximize its flow and impact stewardship, or are you desperately holding onto it to prevent loss ownership? The former expands your reality. The latter shrinks it. The shift from mine to ours. Universal is the great evolutionary leap for this energy. It transforms stability from a static fence you build around your life into a resilient inner anchor that allows you to manage resources gracefully, knowing that the next assignment will arrive precisely when it is needed. Here is your 11th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Choose one area where you are currently feeling emotionally possessive: a relationship, a project, a specific outcome. What advice would you give if you were simply the calm, detached caretaker of that situation rather than the owner? Allow the steward to speak. Following the transition from ownership to stewardship, we must now confront the seductive allure of complete control over our life circumstances. Which brings us to the price of predictability. The Taurian desire for stability drives a profound yearning for a life where every variable is accounted for, every outcome is known, and every day unfolds exactly as anticipated. This predictability is prized because it minimizes the risk of surprise, which, for fixed earth, equals a threat to security. However, the deepest spiritual lesson is that a life entirely dictated by predictability is a life stripped of its greatest potential for creation and magic. When you eliminate all chaos and surprise, you eliminate the very elements that introduce novelty, challenge, and the necessity to evolve. Chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the engine of higher order creation. You cannot mix new colors if you don't allow them to mingle messily. You cannot grow stronger muscles without the micro tears of intense exercise. The price you pay for absolute predictability is stagnation. You sacrifice the possibility of exponential growth for the certainty of linear movement. The soul's evolutionary impulse requires a certain degree of sacred disruption, the divine chaos that introduces necessary course corrections you couldn't have planned for from your limited perspective. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously identify the areas of your life where you are over-controlling for predictability, and deliberately introduce a margin of flexibility, uncertainty, or unplanned space. This is an act of faith in the universe, and an invitation for higher forces to collaborate with your plans. Consider a real-world example in your career path. You might be rigidly following a 5-year plan you drafted years ago, a plan that promises safety and a certain salary level. The adherence to the plan prevents you from seeing or pursuing a lateral move, a new training opportunity, or a collaborative venture that falls completely outside the predetermined safety zone. While the plan offers predictable movement, the unexpected opportunity, the necessary chaos, offers a quantum leap in fulfillment and purpose. By clinging to the map, you miss the discovery. Remember, the goal isn't to become reckless, but to become resilient. Predictability lulls your intuition to sleep. When everything is routine, you stop listening to that subtle inner voice that guides you to the next necessary step. You stop generating your own energy and start reacting to the established patterns. Recall the Uranian energy pushing for change. Section 4. The universe is constantly trying to inject this necessary chaos. When you resist it, you feel stressed and anxious. When you cooperate with it, allowing for a meeting to run long, taking an unexpected detour, or deciding to work on a completely different project than planned, you transform from a victim of unpredictability into a conscious player in the cosmic game. Your spiritual maturity is measured by how gracefully you can pivot when the external landscape shifts. Here is your 12th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What is the one major area of your life, for example, finances, relationships, daily schedule, where you micromanage every detail? What would it look like to consciously surrender 10% of that control today and observe what magic the universe fills that vacuum with? Let the unexpected be your guide. Having released the illusion of complete control through predictability, we must now address the source of validation for the Taurian energy. This takes us to the voice of inner authority. Because Taurus governs the second house of self-worth and possessions, its security often becomes inextricably linked to external proof, the tangible, visible evidence that it is good enough, valuable, or successful. This manifests as seeking external validation, needing the raise to confirm competence, needing social praise for an accomplishment, or relying on material markers, the nice car, the impressive home, to feel inherently worthy. When your sense of self-worth is tethered to external fluctuating proof, you are inherently unstable. No matter how much you possess, you are constantly at the mercy of the market, the opinions of others, and the inevitable decay of material things. This dependence on the outer world is the root of much of the resistance to evolution. Why? Because the leap into the unknown often involves a temporary period where the external proof is stripped away, a period of humility, learning, and vulnerability, and the fixed earth energy cannot tolerate this perceived loss of value. The spiritual principle here is that true self-worth is an internal, non-negotiable state of being, not an externally awarded certificate of achievement. Your value is inherent simply because you exist as a fragment of the divine. When you internalize this, you are no longer dependent on the two ND house markers for security. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously shift your source of validation from tangible, visible metrics to intangible, internal metrics, cultivating an unshakable inner authority. This means valuing the integrity of your effort more than the size of your paycheck, valuing the honesty of your connection more than the status of your relationship, and valuing your courage to change more than your consistency in staying the same. Let's use a real-world example. You might receive a critique on a piece of work, a report, a creation, a proposal. Your fixed earth instinct is to feel threatened, defensive, and internally devalued because the critique suggests your external output is imperfect. You instinctively resist the feedback. The shift to inner authority means receiving the critique, assessing it calmly, and valuing your own internal process. Did I give my best effort? Did I act with integrity? Did I learn something new? If the answers are yes, the external critique is simply data for refinement, not an attack on your soul. Your worth remains untouched. Remember, this is about transforming the second house energy. Instead of possessing tangible things to feel worthy, you are now possessing an internal sense of mastery, self-trust, and resilience that no external force can take away. This inner authority is the only real stability. When you are grounded in this inner truth, you are free to risk, free to fail, and free to evolve, because the outcomes no longer define your core value. Here's your 13th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. When facing a choice, what external approval are you waiting for? And what would your inner, most evolved self command you to do if no one else would ever know the outcome? Trust that commanding voice. It is your new foundation. The search for inner authority, section 13, naturally leads us to the hidden origins of the resistance, the wounds of the past. We must now turn our attention to digging up the roots of insecurity. The Taurian need for excessive stability, material assurance, and predictability is rarely random. It is often a present-day manifestation of deeply rooted insecurities stemming from early childhood experiences or even past life, traumas related to lack, sudden loss, or physical destabilization. When you were young or in a past iteration of your soul's journey, a sudden, painful loss, perhaps of a key resource, a loved one, or a sense of physical safety, created a powerful subconscious mandate: never again. The fixed earth energy then devoted itself entirely to building a reality that would prevent that specific pain from recurring. Today, that old trauma is running the show, manifesting as the need for that extra layer of financial padding, the rigid adherence to routines, or the possessiveness in relationships. You are living your present life based on a contract signed during a moment of past fear. The spiritual insight here is, the stability you seek externally is the psychological safety you were denied internally in the past. The resistance to evolution is fundamentally a resistance to revisiting that old, terrifying feeling of vulnerability. To truly evolve, you must go back and gently tend to the root of the pain, showing your inner child or your ancestral lineage that the present moment is safe, even if it is uncertain. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must identify the historical event or deep-seated fear that triggers your strongest resistance to change, and deliberately offer conscious, compassionate reassurance to that wounded part of yourself. This is not about reliving the trauma, but about decoupling the past fear from the present opportunity. Consider a real-world example. You might experience crippling anxiety whenever your work situation becomes even slightly volatile, immediately defaulting to a frantic, hoarding mindset. Section 7. Upon reflection, you might trace this back to a time in childhood when a parent lost a job, and the resulting financial stress created a sudden, palpable shift in the household safety. The child's mind equated instability equals life-threatening disaster. Now, as an adult, the Taurian energy digs in its heels, refusing to allow any volatility near its income stream, sacrificing genuine fulfillment for the illusion of guaranteed security. The spiritual remedy is to use your current capable adult self to soothe the scared child within. You literally tell that part of you, I see you are scared of losing everything again, but I am an adult now. I have skills, I have options, and I will take care of us, no matter what happens to this one job. We are resilient. This compassionate self-talk breaks the loop of fear that fuels the resistance. Remember, the bull's resistance is not inherently negative. It is the soul's desperate attempt to keep you safe. Your task is to upgrade its protective strategy from static defense to dynamic resilience. You are powerful enough to carry yourself through the uncertainty. Here is your 14th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. When you feel the greatest urge to dig your heels in and resist unnecessary change, what is the earliest memory of loss or instability that surfaces? Acknowledge that old wound and assure it that its mission to keep you safe is appreciated, but the methods must now evolve. As we address the deep roots of resistance, we must now introduce an external dynamic that often forces the fixed Earth to move: the friction of action and conflict. This brings us to the Mars square, catalyzing action. Astrologically, a square creates tension and necessary friction. Symbolically, a Mars square represents the moment when the energy of assertive action and desire Mars confronts the fixed nature of security and comfort Taurus. This tension, which can manifest as conflict, frustration, or a sudden burst of energy, is precisely the friction required for growth. The typical Taurian response to friction or confrontation is avoidance. Because the energy seeks harmony, Venus-ruled instability, conflict is perceived as inherently destabilizing and ugly, recalling the Venusian shadow from Section 6. You'll find the fixed Earth energy delaying decisions, minimizing disagreements, or just hoping that if it stays still long enough, the aggressive, demanding energy of Mars will simply move on. But avoidance only amplifies the pressure, turning small issues into large, explosive confrontations later. The spiritual truth here is that conflict is often the necessary friction point for growth and movement. If you are resistant to change, the universe must introduce a strong external force, a conflict, a demand, a moment of acute discomfort to overcome the inertia. The Mars square energy is not meant to punish you. It is meant to provide the propulsion you were unwilling to generate yourself. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must stop viewing conflict or friction as a threat to your stability and start viewing it as the required energy for forward momentum. When a challenge arises, you must consciously choose to engage the friction rather than retreat into comfort. Consider a real-world scenario. You might have a creative idea or a professional boundary you need to assert. Your instinctive avoidance of conflict keeps you silent. The bull staying still in the field? The Mars energy then builds up, perhaps expressed through a colleague's aggressive behavior or a competitor's sudden move, forcing you to act defensively. The evolutionary step is to harness that Mars energy internally before it becomes an external conflict. You use the potential friction, the awareness that setting a boundary will be temporarily uncomfortable, to generate the assertive action needed to protect your energy and progress. Remember the bull's raw power we discussed in Section 9? Mars is the energy that moves the bull. When you allow external conflict to dictate your movement, you are reacting defensively. When you proactively use the internal Mars energy or clear, decisive action, you are directing the movement. The discomfort of confrontation is temporary. The stagnation of avoidance is corrosive to the soul. You must be willing to weather the temporary shakeup to secure a more authentic evolutionary foundation. Here is your 15th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What necessary, difficult conversation or assertive action are you currently avoiding, and how much inner peace is that avoidance costing you right now? Embrace the necessary friction. It's the catalyst you need. The culmination of facing internal belief systems and external friction leads us to the radical, necessary step for major evolution: creative destruction, tearing down the old foundation. This concept acknowledges that for true, substantial growth to occur, you must sometimes voluntarily and deliberately demolish the structures you spent so much time and effort building, precisely because they are now limiting your future. For fixed earth energy, this is perhaps the most terrifying spiritual act. The foundation, the established job, the comfortable home, the long-term identity is the very definition of security. To tear it down feels like an act of irrational self-sabotage. Yet, if that foundation was built on old fears, Section 14, obsolete beliefs, Section 8, and a need for external validation, Section 13, it can no longer support the weight of your evolved future self. Trying to patch a fundamentally flawed structure is a greater drain than starting anew. The spiritual truth here is that the universe abhors a vacuum, but you must create the vacuum yourself before the highest good can rush in. You must let go of what is safe and stable before the new radical foundation appears. This is the ultimate act of faith required of this energy. You are demonstrating to the universe that your inner stability is so profound that you are capable of handling external instability. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously identify the single most stable structure in your life that no longer aligns with your highest purpose, and begin the deliberate, empowering act of deconstruction. This is not a rash act. It is a mindful, courageous choice to prioritize evolution over comfort. Consider a real-world example. You might have a career that is financially stable and socially respected. Perfect. Manifestation of 2ND house security. However, it feels spiritually dead. It does not utilize your unique gifts and is actively contracting your soul. The Taurian resistance tells you, hold on, don't burn your bridges. Where will the money come from? Creative destruction means realizing that the stability of the income is the barrier to the abundance of your purpose. The deconstruction involves giving notice, selling the unnecessary trappings of that old life, and creating physical and energetic space for the new purpose to manifest, even if it means a period of voluntary, temporary financial insecurity. Remember the Uranian jolt, Section 4? When Uranus performs this creative destruction, it feels brutal and traumatic because it's forced upon you. When you initiate it mindfully and deliberately, it becomes an empowering act of sovereign will. You are moving from being the victim of change to the architect of change. The old foundation must be recycled into the new ground. The ultimate measure of your evolution is your willingness to let go of a good thing that is preventing you from achieving a great thing. You must be willing to walk away from safety when safety is the enemy of your soul's expansion. Here is your 16th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What comfortable, stable structure in your life, relationship, job, identity are you currently using as an emotional crutch, and what bold first step of deconstruction can you take to prove to yourself that your internal values, Section 13, can stand on its own? Start breaking ground. Having embraced the necessary chaos of creative destruction, we now need a methodology for the Taurian temperament to manage this transition. Sudden, dramatic breaks feel foreign and destabilizing to fixed earth. Therefore, the spiritual path here is the yoga of slow surrender. This contrasts the slow, deliberate pace of Taurus with the concept of surrender, showing that release doesn't have to be a sudden, painful event. It can be a mindful, gradual release of control. Taurus excels at deliberate, steady movement. The resistance manifests when the change is perceived as an abrupt, violent rupture. Slow surrender honors the pace of the earth sign while redirecting its enduring focus toward letting go rather than holding on. It is the conscious practice of loosening the grip one finger at a time, recognizing that the journey of release is just as valid and valuable as the journey of acquisition. The spiritual principle is that sustainable evolution occurs in alignment with your natural rhythm, provided that rhythm is directed toward forward motion. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow, but you do have to stop clutching it today. You don't have to end the relationship tonight, but you do have to start honestly assessing its evolutionary viability now. Slow surrender is about changing the intention and the energetic grip before the physical circumstances change. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must identify the control you are maintaining out of fear and create a manageable, recurring practice of gentle, deliberate release. This practice trains your fixed energy to associate release with peace rather than with peril. Consider a real-world example in the realm of decision-making. The Taurian energy tends to agonize over choices, holding all the data, analyzing every possible outcome, because making the wrong choice feels like a structural failure. Section 5. Slow surrender, in this context, involves consciously deciding to make a small, low-stakes decision quickly and imperfectly each day, releasing the need for a guaranteed optimal outcome. You surrender the control over the result and trust the process. You practice saying, I choose this path for now, knowing that I can course correct later, which honors the need for action. Mars, square. Section 15, without violating the need for steady, manageable progress. Remember the stability we discussed in Section 1? Slow surrender redefines stability. It shows you that true grounding comes from trusting your ability to navigate the waves, not your ability to prevent the waves from appearing. Every time you consciously choose to let go of a small need for control, letting someone else choose the restaurant, deciding not to check your email for an extra hour, or deliberately leaving one task unfinished, you are strengthening the muscle of surrender. This is the yoga of the soul, stretching past the point of comfort, but always respecting the body's integrity. It is the mindful Taurian way of collaborating with the unstoppable force of change. You are not fighting the river. You are slowly lifting your anchor. Here is your 17th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. In what specific area of your life are you expending maximum energy to maintain minimum control? What small weekly ritual of intentional surrender, for example, donating one hoarded item, saying yes to one unplanned event, can you adopt to practice letting go gracefully? Let the movement be slow, but let it be irreversible. Now that we have established a methodology for slow surrender, let us apply this principle to the resource that is most heavily weighted by Taurian energy and fear: money. We need to unpack the money mythology. For fixed Earth, money is often not just a medium of exchange. It is a repository for deep spiritual and emotional meaning. It is equated with security, control, love, safety, and sometimes even spiritual worth. This creates a complex mythology or a set of deeply ingrained, often inherited narratives that govern your financial decisions, equating your net worth with your personal worth and spiritual security. This mythology is the reason why the Taurian resistance can be so fierce when it comes to financial risk or change. If money equals security, then risking money feels like risking survival itself. This creates a spiritual bottleneck. You block the flow of abundance. Section 7, by refusing to participate in the dynamic exchange required for wealth generation, preferring instead the static, safe, but low-yielding comfort of the status quo. The irony is that the need for money as a security blanket prevents the acquisition of true, expansive wealth, which always requires some degree of faith and movement. The spiritual truth here is that money is a form of energy and a tool for impact. It is not a measure of your spiritual value or an ultimate source of security. True security is your intrinsic ability to generate value, not the value you currently possess. The mythology creates the spiritual illusion that you can buy yourself out of the human condition of uncertainty. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must identify the specific emotional and spiritual jobs you have assigned to money, and consciously reassign those jobs back to your own inner resources. For example, if money's job is to make you feel safe, you must reassign that job to your inner authority and resilience. Section 13. Consider a real-world scenario. You might consistently refuse to invest in personal development, coaching, or a new certification, viewing the expense as a loss of security rather than an investment in your earning potential. The money mythology says, the money is safer in the bank. The evolutionary truth says, the money is exponentially more powerful when invested in the only asset that can truly create more: your consciousness and skill set. You are literally hoarding cash while starving your potential. Remember the roots of insecurity, Section 14? Often, the money mythology is rooted in ancestral fears of poverty or deprivation. By clinging to money today, you are trying to symbolically heal a past wound. The spiritual work is to bring conscious healing to that wound, recognizing that your stability is no longer dependent on past financial outcomes, but on your current empowered state of being. The act of spending money on joy, growth, and meaningful contribution, the flow is an act of faith that actively dismantles the fear-based mythology. It's a spiritual declaration that I trust myself to create more. Here's your 18th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Complete this sentence. If I had infinite money, the one feeling I would no longer need to chase is underscore. Now, how can you cultivate that feeling, for example? Safety, respect, freedom using only your present internal resources, without involving money at all. Address the emotion, not the balance sheet. Building upon the necessity of dismantling the money mythology and embracing flow, we must now address a broader philosophical resistance inherent in fixed Earth energy, the pleasure-pain paradox. As the sign ruled by Venus, Taurus is a master of comfort and pleasure. The shadow of this mastery, as we discussed in Section 6, is the instinct to avoid anything that hints at discomfort, difficulty, or pain. The Taurian resistance often manifests as a protective barrier designed to ensure a smooth, pleasant journey through life. The spiritual paradox is this: True, evolutionary pleasure, the deep, lasting satisfaction that comes from living a meaningful, expanding life often lies on the other side of an initial discomfort or necessary temporary pain. The temporary pain of growth, the vulnerability of honest communication, the physical strain of new exercise, the emotional discomfort of grieving what you must release is the exact price of admission to the next level of evolution. By instinctively avoiding the friction, section 15, you cap your potential for profound joy and expansive pleasure. You choose a consistent, low-level comfort over the ecstatic, high-vibration pleasure that requires courage. The spiritual truth is that pain is simply information necessary for growth. It is not punishment, and it is not permanent. When you use pain avoidance as your primary operating principle, you are effectively turning off the signals that tell you where the next necessary growth point lies. You are choosing stasis over transcendence. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously re-engineer your relationship with discomfort, viewing it not as a barrier to be retreated from, but as a compass point indicating the direction of your deepest growth. This means actively seeking out the stretch, the challenge, and the vulnerability that your fixed energy usually vetoes. Consider a real-world scenario related to personal fitness or health. Your fixed earth energy may crave comfortable, repetitive, low-impact exercise. This provides stability but not growth. When a trainer suggests a difficult new routine that requires pushing past the initial burn and muscle discomfort, your mind immediately generates excuses rooted in comfort. The evolutionary path is to lean into that temporary burning sensation, recognizing that the discomfort is the physical sign that old limits are being broken and a new, stronger structure is being built. The deeper pleasure, the vitality, strength, and confidence is only accessible through that initial pain. Remember the bull's tremendous endurance, section 9? That endurance is meant to be applied through the challenge, not against the challenge. When you use that enduring strength to sit with and process emotional discomfort, the anxiety of the unknown, the fear of letting go, you transmute the fear into power. You learn that you are capable of holding a higher vibration, even when the external feelings are turbulent. To escape the pleasure-pain paradox, you must redefine true pleasure as the satisfaction of living in alignment with your soul's truth, regardless of the temporary discomfort this path requires. Here is your 19th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What one challenging task or necessary emotional conversation are you delaying because it promises temporary discomfort? And what higher level, lasting pleasure, for example, integrity, freedom, genuine connection is waiting for you on the other side of that temporary hurdle? Step into the fire. It is the forge of your evolution. The movement through discomfort, section 19, naturally extends into the relational realm, which for Taurian energy is another primary area where stability can devolve into stagnation. We now focus on releasing attachments to people and places. The fixed earth instinct to create stability applies not only to possessions and money, but intensely to the environment and the people within it. This energy can confuse genuine, enduring love with possession, and confuse comfortable familiarity with deep, transformative connection. When you are deeply attached, you are essentially defining your own stability by the unchanging presence of an external factor, a person, a home, a neighborhood. This attachment creates resistance when that external factor needs to evolve, move, or simply change its role in your life. You may find yourself subconsciously trying to keep a relationship or a home exactly as it was, resisting their natural cycles of change, growth, or eventual completion. This attempt to freeze-frame relational energy stifles the other person's and your own evolution. The spiritual principle here is, true love and authentic connection are built on mutual sovereignty and free flow, not on fixed presence or emotional necessity. Your goal is not to possess the other person or the place, but to cherish the energy shared while it aligns with your highest path. Recalling the transition to stewardship in section 11, the core actionable insight for this section is, you must practice loving and appreciating people and places for who, what they are, right now, without any attachment to who, what they were, or who, what you need them to be for your security. This radical acceptance allows the relationship or the environment to evolve naturally, freeing you from the energetic drain of constant resistance. Consider a real-world scenario involving a physical location, perhaps your childhood home or the city you've lived in for decades. This place holds immense sentimental value and is a huge source of stability. When an opportunity arises that requires a geographical move, perhaps for an evolutionary career step or a relationship expansion, the Taurian resistance immediately surfaces. It's not just the logistics, it's the fear of losing the anchoring identity associated with that place. You're attached to the memory and the predictability, section 12 of the locale. The evolutionary step is to realize that the grounding you seek is within you, section 10. And the beauty you appreciate, Venusian energy, can be found or created In relationships, this means recognizing when you are projecting your need for safety onto another person, expecting them to remain a fixed constant in your fluid life. The moment you release your energetic grip, the need for them to stay put, or stay the same you, give them the gift of freedom. And in return, you receive the gift of true, unencumbered love, whether their path remains parallel to yours or diverges. You are replacing the weight of attachment with the lightness of appreciation. Here is your 20th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Which person or place in your life currently feels like the primary source of your external security, and what small, intentional action can you take today to remind yourself that your connection to them is based on love, not necessity? Release the anchor. Trust your inherent buoyancy. As we cultivate the lightness of appreciation and release attachments, we address one of the most difficult concepts for fixed energy to embrace: changing one's mind. We turn to the U-turn of self-correction. For Taurian energy, consistency is often mistaken for integrity. The deep-seated resistance Section 5 means that once a course of action is declared, or a belief is established Section 8, a radical course correction, a 180-degree turn, or U-turns, perceived not as a sign of intelligent adaptation, but as a public or internal failure of character. To change your mind, to admit that the initial path was flawed, or that the old belief is obsolete, feels like tearing down the carefully constructed foundation of self-worth Section 13. The fixed earth would rather suffer through a suboptimal plan than admit the need for a self-correction. This resistance to the U-turn keeps you locked into outdated commitments, draining relationships and stagnant professional paths, all in the name of consistency. The spiritual principle here is that the capacity for intelligent self-correction is the highest form of spiritual maturity and personal integrity. True integrity is not about consistency with your past self. It is about consistency with your highest present truth. When new data, new wisdom, or new feelings emerge that contradict the old path, the evolved soul immediately pivots. The U-turn is not a failure. It is an efficient alignment. The core, actionable insight for this section is: you must consciously embrace changing your mind, not as a sign of weakness or failure, but as a celebration of your spiritual growth and responsiveness to new information. You need to internalize the phrase, "I've learned more since then." Consider a real-world example in professional life. You might have committed to a specific business model or invested heavily in a particular skill set years ago. Now, the market has shifted and your energy is pulling you in a different direction. The fixed earth resists. "I've put too much time in this. I'll look foolish if I abandon it now." The resistance to the U-turn is purely ego-driven, sacrificing future success for the illusion of past infallibility. The self-correction, however, allows you to reallocate the bull's potent energy Section 9 from defending a sinking ship to launching a new vessel. Remember the cost of predictability Section 12? The need to predict the future requires you to lock yourself into a course of action. The U-turn is the ultimate freedom from that trap. It affirms that your stability is so deeply rooted that you can absorb the necessary change of direction without crumbling. You are giving yourself permission to be a dynamic, evolving being. Start practicing low-stakes U-turns. Change your mind about dinner plans. Decide mid-project to redesign a small element. Or simply admit, "I was wrong about that." In a low-pressure conversation, these small acts retrain your system to associate self-correction with relief and empowerment rather than shame. Here is your 21st thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What long-standing commitment, promise, or opinion are you defending purely out of the fear of admitting you've changed or learned more? Grant yourself the immediate and sovereign permission to execute a U-turn. The practice of self-correction, Section 21, requires immense inner strength, which brings us back to the earth element in its most fundamental state. We turn to the metaphor of the seed. Taurus is the sign of the established root, but the ultimate expression of the earth is the tiny seed. The seed contains the entire blueprint for a magnificent plant, yet to evolve, it must first submit to total dark transformation. For the seed to grow, it must crack open its tough, fixed outer shell, the structural security it was designed to maintain. It must dissolve its rigid form and push through the cold, dark, challenging soil. It must risk the dissolution of its former identity to reach for the light. This is the perfect spiritual model for the Taurian journey of evolution. The resistance we've been discussing is the stubbornness of the seed's shell, determined to maintain its integrity, even if it means sacrificing its potential for life. The spiritual truth here is that your greatest security is found not in the hardness of your outer shell, but in the life force, the evolutionary impulse contained within. The process of letting go of the familiar, stable, fixed life feels like dying, because, in a sense, the old identity must die for the new, magnificent self to emerge. The core actionable insight for this section is, you must consciously embrace moments of dissolution. darkness, and breaking down as necessary, temporary stages of profound creation. When you feel the intense emotional or spiritual break, the loss of a familiar structure, the vulnerability of a new beginning, you must see it as the cracking of the seed's shell, not the end of life. Consider a real-world example involving the process of personal development. You might have reached a plateau in your spiritual or professional growth. You feel stagnant and heavy. To evolve, you realize you need a period of deep introspection and withdrawal, a moment of profound inactivity and darkness where the old assumptions dissolve and new insights germinate. The fixed earth energy resists this dark night of the soul, interpreting the inactivity and lack of visible progress as failure or self-sabotage. The evolutionary step is to honor the darkness, trusting that the most vital unseen work is happening underground. You are allowing the old shell to break down so the roots can find the new nutrients. Remember, the bull's power section 9 needs a purpose. The purpose is not to maintain the seed, but to push the shoot through the hard soil. You use your tenacity to endure the discomfort of the in-between phase, the phase where you have let go of the old reality, but the new one has not yet broken the surface. This is the courageous choice to trust the blueprint of your soul over the evidence of your current senses. Here is your 20-second thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Where in your life do you feel stuck in a dark or dissolving phase? And how can you consciously shift your perspective to trust that this very darkness is the necessary environment for the most vital, unseen germination of your next great self? Allow your shell to crack. The cracking of the seed's shell, section 22, requires a practical approach for fixed earth energy to follow through. It's not enough to simply accept dissolution. You need an active strategy for loosening the grip of rigidity. This brings us to the art of the spiritual pivot. A pivot is a small, conscious, deliberate shift in direction that honors the need for stability, Taurus strength. While committing to movement evolution's mandate, it is about initiating small, significant changes in daily life to retrain your system to accept dynamic energy as the new normal. The spiritual principle here is that a multitude of small, intentional adjustments yields greater, more resilient change than one catastrophic forced upheaval. The fixed earth energy can manage small deviations. It's the sudden, unannounced demolition, recall Uranus in section 4, that triggers the deepest resistance. By practicing the spiritual pivot, you take back control of the evolutionary timeline, choosing your own deliberate steps rather than waiting for the universe to kick the rug out from under you. The core, actionable insight for this section is you must identify areas of ingrained, unconscious rigidity in your daily life and initiate a minimum of 3 small, deliberate, and non-essential shifts each week. These pivots are spiritual acupuncture, small needles of change that wake up the stagnant energy pathways. Consider a real-world example in a domestic setting. If your Taurian energy has dictated that certain household items must always be in a specific, unchanging spot, a ritualistic order that provides emotional security, a spiritual pivot is to move one item, intentionally, to a completely new but logical location. This is not decluttering, which is a massive, daunting task for this energy. It is a gentle assertion of choice over routine. By choosing this minor instability, you signal to your subconscious that you are the sovereign creator of your environment, not its prisoner. Another pivot could be changing the time of a fixed daily ritual by 15 minutes, or intentionally consuming a different type of food than your routine dictates. Remember the comfort trap of the familiar section 3? The spiritual pivot is the escape route. It breaks the hypnotic spell of routine. Each small act of intentional change is a successful micro-experiment in adaptability. It tells your deeply entrenched need for stability, I am safe, even when things are slightly different. This accumulated evidence of resilience eventually allows you to make a major U-turn, section 21, without a corresponding nervous breakdown. You are turning the tendency toward fixed habits into the habit of conscious evolutionary movement. The art is in choosing shifts that are significant enough to break the pattern, but insignificant enough not to trigger a defensive resistance. Look for the subtle areas of your life where you feel a compulsive need for things to be just sowed. That is where the resistance is hiding. Here is your 23rd thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Identify 2 daily micro-rituals, for example. How you start your morning, the way you sit, or the sequence of a task that you perform on autopilot. What 2-degree shift can you deliberately introduce to these rituals tomorrow to practice the art of the pivot? Small hinges swing big doors. As we near the culmination of this deep dive, it is essential to look at the sign that holds the deepest evolutionary medicine for Taurus. Its opposite. We turn now to integrating Scorpio's shadow. Every sign is balanced and completed by its opposite on the zodiac wheel. Taurus, the fixed earth sign concerned with security and possession, 2nd house, is opposed by Scorpio, the fixed water sign concerned with transformation, power, depth, death, and rebirth, 8th house. The Taurian resistance to evolution is often a resistance to the fundamental Scorpionic concepts of death and letting go. Taurus wants to keep things. Scorpio insists on clearing out the rot. Taurus wants to stay on the comfortable surface. Scorpio demands diving into the messy, complicated, and often terrifying depths. The evolutionary lesson of Scorpio is that true, non-material power comes from the willingness to surrender control. Face your shadow and allow for the total death of the old self. When Taurian energy fully integrates its Scorpionic shadow, it understands that the only way to achieve unshakable, resilient stability is by regularly undergoing intense periods of transformation. It learns to accept that emotional and material death ending a relationship, leaving a job, financial loss is not an ending, but a necessary composting process that generates the rich soil for the next life cycle. The core, actionable insight for this section is, you must deliberately and mindfully engage in symbolic acts of death and rebirth, bringing Scorpionic depth and intensity into your Taurian desire for safety. This means choosing situations that require vulnerability, intense emotional honesty, and the release of something you know is no longer serving your soul, even if it feels terrifying. Consider a real-world example in the realm of emotional honesty. Your Taurian energy might avoid deep emotional processing or confrontation, Mars square, section 15, because it feels destabilizing. You prefer the calm, surface harmony, Venusian shadow, section 6. The Scorpionic integration demands that you choose to engage in a therapeutic process or a deep conversation that forces you to confront a long-buried fear or resentment. That emotional descent feels like a temporary death, the death of an illusion of safety, but the result is the rebirth of a more integrated, truthful, and spiritually powerful self. Remember the hoarding instinct, section 7. Scorpio integration means realizing that clinging to things prevents the influx of power. Scorpio understands that you must be willing to lose it all to gain true non-material control over your own destiny. It's the ultimate lesson in relinquishing ownership for sovereignty. By consciously engaging your opposite sign's energy, you stop making yourself wait for the universe to force the change through a crisis. You become the willing participant in your own necessary death and rebirth. You turn your resistance into resilience and your stability into regenerative power. Here is your 24th thought-provoking question for self-reflection. What is the one major, long-buried emotional or financial truth? Are you actively avoiding your secret in the basement? And what small, intense act of vulnerability can you take today to invite Scorpionic transformation into that dark space? Dive in. The water is transformative. We have reached the final stage of our evolutionary journey. Having navigated the traps of comfort, the necessity of chaos, and the power of transformation, we now arrive at the ultimate redefinition, the new Earth, stability as inner peace. The entire purpose of this process is to transmute the fixed Earth's resistance into true resilient stability. This stability is not a static external condition, dependent on a fixed salary, a fixed partner, or a fixed location. It is an unshakable, resilient inner peace that allows for external fluidity. The evolved Taurian energy anchors itself in its inner authority, section 13, and its sensory presence, section 10. It understands that the greatest possession is its own conscious awareness, which is the only resource that can never be taken away. When your stability is rooted inside, the external world can shift, dramaticalness can deliver its jolt, the foundation can be creatively destroyed, and the Scorpionic lessons can bring about necessary endings. Yet your core remains centered. You stop trying to control the environment and start trusting your inherent ability to thrive within any environment. The spiritual truth is that resilience is not the avoidance of falling. It is the confidence in your ability to get back up, transformed and stronger every single time. This is the essence of the new Earth. Energy, grounded, sensual, powerful, but dynamically aligned with the universal flow. The core, actionable insight for this final section is, you must create a daily, intentional practice of radical self-acceptance, recognizing that your stability is guaranteed by your own consciousness, regardless of external proof. This is the practice of true grounding, not into the material world, but into your soul's immutable essence. Consider a final, encompassing, real-world scenario. You have just completed a major spiritual pivot, section 23. Perhaps leaving the secure job for the uncertain, purpose-driven path. The fixed earth energy expects the ground to open up beneath your feet. Instead, because you have done the inner work, you find a deep, quiet sense of peace. You are not afraid of the temporary financial dip or the lack of predictability. You are curious about the resources you will now generate. You are present in the moment, section 10, enjoying the freedom of the day. You are trusting your inherent worth, section 13, to create the next step. This shift from fear-based gripping to faith-based flow is the hallmark of the evolved Earth sign. Remember all the threads we've pulled? The release of scarcity, section 7, the embrace of discomfort, section 19, and the freedom of self-correction, section 21. All of these practices coalesce into this new definition of stability. You are no longer the sturdy dam resisting the river. You are the solid, fertile bank that guides the river's flow, knowing that the water is life and movement is necessary. Here is your 25th and final thought-provoking question for self-reflection. Imagine you are standing in the eye of a storm. Everything around you is swirling chaos and change. Where is the one unmoving internal point of quiet certainty that you can return to with a single breath? Cultivate that stillness. That is your new earth. We've covered immense territory today, from the illusion of static security to the power of dynamic resilience. You've examined your deepest fears of loss, the cost of predictability, and the power of your own latent potential. The ultimate lesson of this Zodiac Unpacked episode is that your stability isn't something you acquire or hold on to. It is something you are. It's time to stop letting resistance define your evolution. Embrace the flow, trust your inner authority, and let the magnificent, resilient, and utterly beautiful being that you are finally blossom. Meditate on this one thought for the rest of the week. My greatest security is my own adaptability. Write it down. Say it out loud. Let it override the old script of fear. Keep choosing the brave, messy, evolutionary path. That's all for today. Keep trusting your intuition, and I'll see you in the next one.